Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your usual host, David Fox. With me, as always, is the wonderful and amazing UberHansen. Folks, the Bills did not play in yesterday's game, which for some people was probably a good thing, including me. When I remembered, like, oh yeah, the Bills aren't playing this week, I was like, yeah, I'm okay with that this week. I'm okay with not dealing with this kind of stress today.
Yeah.
Fine. Um, but I'm sure for some of you it felt a little odd, a little unnatural to go a Sunday without Bills football. But we're here now, and we're here to talk about yesterday's games, how they relate to the Bills and their playoff hopes moving forward. And we're also going to be discussing the Kansas City Chiefs and that matchup with them on next Sunday. But before we get into all that, Uber, how are you?
Yeah, good. I definitely was one of the people that needed a week off, just like to reduce the stress, reduce the pressure, and then now we get back into it with 5 more games, hopefully more than 5. But start with this one Chiefs game. But yeah, yesterday was a good day of kind of relaxing football for the first time this season.
It really was. It's a lot easier to just be like, okay, I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to worry about just like things that are happening, things happening on Twitter, etc. It's just like, all right, just relax. Things are fine. Former co-host of the show, Kyle Salagi, coming in. Is this a Shogun podcast yet? I'm here for the Shogun talk. Not yet. The show is not premiered yet, Kyle. So I don't know what we would be talking about unless you've read the book itself, which I ordered the other week in anticipation of the show. I was like, oh yeah, I could probably get this thing done and out there before the show comes out. It is a good 1,300 pages. So
no way.
That's not happening before the end of January or whenever this show comes out. That will probably be, whenever I get to it, will probably be the longest book I've read. I've read a book that's like a little over 1,200 pages, but it's yeah, that's a lot to ask in like a month and a half. That's not happening.
How long is Goodnight Moon? I think it's like 14 pages. That's about my speed right now.
That's your pace. That's what you enjoy. Right in that sweet spot. Yeah. Before we get to anything else, we're going to take care of a little bit of business. First of all, with our lovely friends over at the Cover One flagship show, Greg and Aaron, take it away.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
Thank you, Greg and Aaron. As usual, the consummate professionals that they are, the exact same breed every single week. I can't do it at all. I mean, it's amazing that they're able to do it. It's a talent for sure, and I'm gonna try my best as I talk about our other sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Folks, we are getting towards the end of regular season fantasy football. Playoffs are approaching. Is your team winning? No, that's okay, because if you go to Underdog Fantasy and use their pick'em contest, you can win money predicting if Josh Allen will go over his yard totals, touchdowns, completions, and more. If you think Allen to Diggs, Allen to Kincaid, Allen to Davis, one of those matchups has got to work, right? You can put all of them in your pick'em, predict up to 5 different over-unders correctly, and win 20 times your original money. Use the promo code COVER1 when signing up to make your first deposit, and Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That is a free $100 US in free play. If you use the promo code COVER1, sign up today and start winning today. You must be 18 years or older to do so. Thank you, Underdog Fantasy, for continuing to sponsor not only the Roundup, but the Cover One network as a whole. Yeah, this is great. This is it's very weird doing this without a Bills game to talk about during the regular season. It's like I watched an entire day's worth of football yesterday, but none of it was the Bills. So it's a little bit different. It's a little different. RJ says, remember the Mandalorian segments? That would be cool with Shogun talk. Kyle, how can I forget Star Wars talk? I'll force my way back for Andor. Whenever Andor comes, which might get pushed to 2025 now, which is a shame. So let's talk about where the Bills are at right now. They are currently the 10th seed. They sit at 6-6. They are now coming off their bye week. This is going to be more of your segment because you are much more plugged into these sorts of things than I am. You have a weekly segment or a weekly thing on Reddit talking about playoff scenarios, rooting interests. So go for it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Bills are the 10th seed. That's not great considering only 7 teams make the playoffs, but it's not all doom and gloom. I know a lot of fans yesterday, for instance, were all doom and gloom around 4-10, 4-15, thinking everything was going against the Bills. That just wasn't the case. In fact, yesterday was actually a really good day for the Bills. I mean, the Dolphins did get a win, which that was to be expected. And then the Colts somehow continue to win, which is a problem. But other than that, I actually think the Bills have a decent path to the playoffs. Obviously, they need to start winning games. Like they can't go 3-2, finish the season 9-8, and think they're going to make the playoffs. But 4-1 probably gets them in. 5-0 just about guarantees them getting in. And the teams in front of them all have question marks, right? I mean, we talk about the Broncos are one thing. I'll pass on them for a second, but the Browns don't have a quarterback. The Colts have Gardner Minshew. The Steelers now are riding with Mitch Trubisky. So there's 3 teams right there in front of the Bills that have backup quarterbacks in reality. Buffalo should be able to catch them. So I still think this team has a pretty decent path to the playoffs.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a chance. Yeah, that's always the worst part, right? The hope is always what gets you in the end. Yeah. But their remaining schedule is tough. Specifically, the next 2 games are tough, right? The next 2 games are going to be the toughest ones. You got at the Chiefs, and then you're at home against the Cowboys. Then you're on the road against the Chargers, at home against the Patriots, and then on the road against the Dolphins. Okay. So depending on how things play out, that last game might not even matter for the Bills in certain scenarios. As long as they do what they need to do in the rest of these games. The Chiefs, Chargers, and Patriots games are the absolute must-wins, right? To be in the conversation by week 18. The Cowboys game, how much of that really impacts things, though?
Yeah, I mean, so mainly what you're referring to here's tiebreakers, right? And the Bills conference record, I don't have it in front of me right now, but is pretty rough. And that could impact them in a scenario where they're tied with the Colts, where they're tied with the Steelers, or even the Browns, teams like that. So really, the Cowboys one, you could afford to drop that. Like, for instance, if the Bills go 4-0 in their AFC games and drop the one NFC game, I would be pretty confident that they're making the playoffs. If they drop one of these AFC games, then you're talking about them being a little bit of trouble here, especially like this. That's why this Chiefs game is so big, right? Like in theory, we talk about them being able to go 4-1 and make the playoffs, but that's all dependent on winning those AFC games because that tiebreaker is so important. This game against the Chiefs is probably the biggest game of the year for them, just because I believe if they beat the Chiefs that they're going to go on a run and they're going to rattle off wins against the Cowboys, Chargers, Patriots, and maybe even the Dolphins as well. But yeah, that Cowboys one, I think we could rest easy during that game if the Bills can pull off a win in Kansas City.
That's fair. And, for all the grief that Bills fans have been dealt by the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs, they've been pretty good against them in the regular season, which is a very interesting dichotomy and probably doesn't help the whole Sean McDermott narrative. But it is interesting that and especially when you look at that game last night. Now, there were a lot of things that happened at the end of that game that did not go well for the Chiefs. And it's interesting because that offense just can't, and we'll obviously get a little deeper into this with the Chiefs preview, but that offense just is not where it needs to be. The defense has been great for most of the season, but now they're starting to get some injuries. They weren't quite at the level they've been throughout most of the season last night. Like it really things need to change in Kansas City, and they need to change in a hurry. I don't know if that's really going to happen with the Cowboys. They're on a tear right now, and Dak Prescott in particular is like trying his best to be potentially an MVP candidate, at least in my mind, right? Like if I forget which thing reported it today or whatever, but Brock Purdy now has the best odds for MVP, which is ridiculous in my mind. And I don't even think he's a bad quarterback or anything like that, but it's ridiculous that he's the leader in the MVP odds. Ridiculous, insane, asinine, one might say. That one person would be me. But Dak Prescott is playing at a very, very high level. And preview for next week, we will have somebody on to help us preview the Cowboys, and he might be one of, if not the biggest, Dak Prescott supporters in the world. So be prepared for that. You look at the Chargers, you look at the Patriots, you look at the Dolphins. The Chargers are a mess. They scored 6 points against the Patriots, and the Patriots defense, by the way, fun fact, the Patriots have now lost 3 straight games in which they have held their opponent to 10 points or less, which is astounding. First of all, a great accomplishment by the Patriots defense to be able to do that, despite their offense being so inept in every way imaginable. So, and again, that kind of goes back to the idea that the Patriots were their best game was probably against the Bills, which makes that loss all the more aggravating than it already was. And then you have the Chargers, who beat the Patriots yesterday, but like they're not a good team. I mean, let's call it. There's some Chargers truthers out there. God bless them. That's an interesting team to watch. They can't run the ball. They can't play defense effectively, consistently, week in and week out. These games are winnable, right? These games are winnable down the stretch. But you have to win the games, and the Bills have not done that, right? Like it's a very stupid thing to say. It's the most obvious thing anybody can say, but it's the truth, right? Like these are winnable games for them. Even the Dolphins game, even the Chiefs game, these are winnable games for them. They just have to get to a point where they don't blow these games at the very end. And I don't like. We've done a whole video on the film room. Eric and Anthony did a great job of it. Go watch it if you haven't already. It's well worth it. They will articulate it in words that I can't. It's got to change. Like something has got to change about this. And I think, coming into the season, there was a certain level of anticipation with Sean McDermott taking over as the defensive play caller, as the de facto defensive coordinator. Sort of this feeling of like, okay, something has to change on the defensive side of the ball. Leslie Frazier is a good defensive coordinator. He does a lot of good things. He gets his guys in position to do what they need to do, but he's too vanilla, and there's too many things that happen that are too consistent week in and week out. Something's got to change on that side of the ball. So there was a welcome sense in that. But I think now we're starting to see sort of the stress of being the head coach of this team, plus being the defensive coordinator. And yeah, he brought in Al Holcomb to sort of be this assistant. But at the end of the day, he's still the one who's in charge of creating everything, doing these game plans, making all these adjustments. And it's tough. It's a tough thing to do. And he's calling these plays from the sideline. I've talked about this before. I have no idea how any coaches call plays on the sideline, especially on defense. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. I don't have the brain to do that in my life. But it's tough. It's a very tough thing to do. And, whether or not that changes, right? I mean, when Leslie Frazier did leave the Bills were pretty open about the fact that they said, yeah, he left, but if he wants to come back next year, we'll have him back. And I believe them. And I think after this season, Sean McDermott's probably like, yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, you run this defense how you want, Leslie. This is a lot for me. It
and that would drive Bills fans. Bills fans crazy.
There's part of me that wants it to happen so bad, just to see what the takes would be after that. It would be pure chaos, but it'd be kind of funny. It'd be funny.
Yeah.
And there's a certain level of issues that I would have with that too. Just because I don't want to go back to that Leslie Frazier style necessarily, even though it is a style that can win, especially with the players that the Bills have when they're healthy. But it's tough. And especially when you're talking about replacing potentially both starting safeties next season, right? Mm-hmm. Assuming Hyde and Poyer are both gone. That's a tough ask. It's going to be tough no matter what. But moving on to sort of how the rest of this conference looks like. The Steelers are at number 5. They're still the 5 seed after yesterday's loss.
Yep. Unless that changed and I missed it somewhere, but yeah, they're still the 5 seed. Hey, and I'm still going to hold out. I'm still holding out hope that they're somehow going to win that AFC North because I was adamant about it, and there's still a chance. Hell, Mitch Trubisky's a better quarterback than Kenny Pickett, and Mitch Trubisky sucks. So I'm living with it.
Steelers, man, they didn't just lose; they got their asses kicked by the Cardinals. The Cardinals, who are trying to get like a top 3 pick here. Like, this is crazy. And that was a game where it was raining, it was lightning, it got delayed by lightning multiple times. You're losing to a team that plays in a dome in the desert on the West Coast? Are you serious? Come on. This is ridiculous. If you had told me that it was going to downpour, if it was going to rain, that inclement weather was going to take place in Pittsburgh at Acrisure Stadium. That sounds disgusting to say, by the way. It's Heinz Field. If you had told me that disgusting weather was going to happen at Heinz Field yesterday against the Arizona Cardinals, I would have said, all right, good for the Steelers to get an easy win. No, they get their butts handed to them by the Cardinals. Then they have the Patriots next. That's on Thursday Night Football, right?
Yeah, Thursday night. That's bad. That's going to be a really, really bad one.
Bailey Zappi versus Mitch Trubisky on Thursday Night Football. Al Michaels might just pass out in the middle of the game, honestly. We have our regularly scheduled guest, Zulazu, with his $1.99 super chat, Bench Von Failure. Thank you. So with that, they're in Indianapolis against the Colts. The Colts are another team we're going to talk about as well, because they are also 7-5, and they're currently the 6th seed, and they look tough to beat, in my opinion. They at least are worth watching on a week-to-week basis, because Shane Steichen is doing some great things on that offense. That defense is, it's not amazing, but they do enough against the teams that they should play well against. And yesterday was the first really good Alec Pierce game for them on offense, which if he comes on with Michael Pittman, that's a really good duo for Gardner Minshew to work with. You get Jonathan Taylor back in a couple weeks, I think. You still have Zach Moss, and Zach Moss didn't have the best game yesterday. But I feel confident in him being better than what he was yesterday moving forward, given how he's played the rest of the season, right? So the Colts they're a feisty team, and you look at their schedule. Hold on, before we get to the Colts, let's finish off the Steelers. Steelers have the Patriots on Thursday, then they're at the Colts, then the Bengals, Seahawks, and Ravens. They could beat every single one of those teams. They've already beaten the Ravens. The Bengals are dead in the water without Joe Burrow. The Seahawks, they're not a bad team per se, and Geno Smith had his best game on Thursday Night Football against the Cowboys easily. That is one of the best games I've seen from Geno Smith ever, if not his best game ever.
Yep.
It's phenomenal throws and quarterbacking in that game. But I think we all know that the Seahawks are also a very beatable team, right? You're not always going to get A+ level quarterbacking from Geno Smith. You might get A-, you might get B, maybe even C, right? There's a sliding scale with the Geno Smith playing. It's tough, but I think they could easily win out. The Steelers could win out. Will they? Probably not, because they lost to the Cardinals yesterday, and that was one of their easy. That was looking at this stretch. That was their easiest game.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes a game against the Patriots. Like, what exactly are we doing here? I don't have any confidence in this team. They could easily win out down the stretch. But I can't bring myself to say that they're going to do that.
Yeah, the Steelers, if they go 5-0, they're winning the AFC North. If they finish the season 12-5, they will win the North. I don't, as much as I kind of want that just so I can be able to say I was right, that's not going to happen. At this point, there's almost no way they're winning the AFC North. In fact, this is going to sound wild. I think they're losing to the Patriots on Thursday night. And I think the Patriots stink. I just think that Bill Belichick is going to make Mitch Trubisky's life a living hell, and they're going to win that game 10-6, something like that, something awful, and it's going to be a terrible watch. But really, I look at this Steelers schedule, and I'm like, I would expect them to lose to the Seahawks. They could beat them. I would expect them to lose to the Ravens, assuming that game means something. And then I would expect them to drop one of those three to the Colts, Patriots, or Bengals. So right there, you're looking at what, 2-3. So you're looking at 9-8. There you go. That's what the Bills need. 9-8 from the Steelers, and they should be golden.
Yeah. Real quick, our fellow Cover One creator, Joe DeRosa. First of all, thank you for joining in. Second of all, he's right. If you are just tuning in, drop a like. We appreciate it. It helps things very much, and we appreciate all the support that we get on this show from you, our lovely, lovely listeners and viewers. Also, go check out Under Review tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. New time for Joe DeRosa's Under Review. Well-deserved, well-earned. Back to the Colts. So they're at the Bengals. Again, a team that's just sort of dead in the water without Joe Burrow. Against the Steelers, like we talked about. At Atlanta against the Falcons, and then versus the Raiders and versus the Texans. So the Bengals game feels like their easiest win.
Yes.
And the Steelers, we already talked about the Steelers. We don't need to relitigate that. The Falcons are interesting here, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, that game probably doesn't matter too much for them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also like, if you drop that game, that is when the standings are this tight, and they are tight right now in the AFC. They are very, very tight. When things are this tight, every single game does count. And you can't just shrug off the Falcons, because at the end of the day, even though the Falcons aren't a great team, I feel pretty confident in saying that the Falcons are probably gonna like limp their way into winning that division. Either them or the Bucks, right? Because the Saints just can't do it. The Panthers are absolute train wreck. The only team that's been eliminated from the playoffs so far, which in the NFC is really saying something. And so the Falcons can do good stuff when they're not getting in their own way. The defense can create turnovers. Jesse Bates has been phenomenal this season, probably one of the best offseason additions for any team, if we're being honest. And he got a fat contract to go to Atlanta, and he's making the most of it. So good for them. But their pass rush is kind of lacking. The offense has tons of talent that Arthur Smith just like is okay with not using, I guess. Like, I guess we'll just run the ball with Cordero Patterson when we drafted Bijan Robinson 7th overall. Drake London is a good player, and him and Desmond Ridder seem to have a good connection. Kyle Pitts hasn't been bad for them, but he's not like electric, and he should be electric because he's that type of guy. He's that type of playmaker, in my opinion. They're a very weird team to try and figure out, but as long as the Colts don't like poop the bed against them, that's a winnable game. I mean, that really is a very winnable game for them. Against the Raiders, they're kind of over that Antonio Pierce interim head coach bump. So they're kind of just limping towards the finish line at this point, if you ask me. Like, that's a very easy win for them. And then the Texans, that's going to be an interesting one, right? Because the Texans are another team that's really, really good. They've got really good quarterback play. Their defense is, coming along. It's not there. They don't quite have the guys that they need right now. Derek Stingley has been playing very well the last month. Will Anderson has been contributing as a rookie. Hasn't the stat box really isn't there for Will Anderson, but he's playing really, really well for them. Jonathan Grenard's been good. Blake Cashman's been good for them. Like they've got good players on that team on defense, but yeah, they also lost Tank Dell yesterday, which is a big blow for them and really unfortunate because Tank Dell was phenomenal for them throughout this whole season. And so now you're down to like Nico Collins, who's been playing well, Robert Woods, former Bill, Devin Singletary, who didn't really show up in yesterday's game, but that's going to be a very, very tough matchup, especially when you consider the fact that the Jaguars are the ones who are leading this division. So this is not about the division title for that last game with the Colts and the Texans. This really might be the deciding factor for both of these teams by the end of the season.
Yeah, I actually like if you pick Texans and Colts, like tell me they're playing on a neutral field. I think the Texans are the better football team, mainly because I just trust CJ Stroud more than I trust Gardner Minshew.
100%.
This Colts team is so odd, and like just kind of looking through what they've done this season, like they could easily have multiple more wins. They could easily have multiple more losses. Like them sitting at 7-5, they don't feel like a 7-5 team. They feel more like a 5-7 team. I mean, yesterday's game was a perfect example of that, right? They had no rights to win that game. You don't block 2 punts in a game. That doesn't happen. Like I can't recall that happening. I'm 100% positive it has, but I don't remember that happening. And then the Titans missed the extra point because the punter was hurt. And if they make that, the game's over. They win the game, and then the Colts are sitting at 6-6. But no, instead they're at 7-5 because Will Levis, absolute disaster in overtime. And then the Colts just march down the field and easily score and win that game. I don't buy the Colts, and I'm not going to buy them. Looking at their final schedule, right? Like Bengals, Steelers, Falcons, Raiders, Texans. I'm looking at another 2-3, maybe 3-2 team. If they go 3-2, then the Bills are kind of in a bit of trouble here, right? If that one of those losses is against the Falcons, then that 10 wins. I think I'd have to go look at that exact tiebreaker, but I think that the Colts would then, in theory, have the conference record better than the Bills and be ahead of Buffalo essentially no matter what. But yeah. The Colts, I'm not going to buy them until they string together a few more wins. I could see them losing to the Bengals this weekend, which would be, kind of change this narrative quickly.
That would be a tough loss to lose to Jake Browning. Yeah, I mean, Dolphins right now are they're the 1 seed. The Dolphins are the 1 seed
right now. Yeah, depending on the Jaguars game. If Jacksonville wins, Jacksonville jumps up.
Florida teams thriving right now. Who'd have thought? Of course. Dolphins, like, I'd say the odds are pretty high that they're just going to win this division at this point. Would you agree with that?
I would say if the Bills beat the Chiefs, I think that there's still a legitimate hope that they can still find a way to win this division, because the final 3 games for the Dolphins being Cowboys, Ravens, Bills, the Dolphins still haven't proven that they can beat a good football team. So until I see that, I'm not going to believe that either. But saying that, the Cowboys also haven't proven that they could be a legitimately good football team. Seahawks are pretty decent, but those 2 teams have the lowest strength of victory in the entire NFL for good reason. So it'll be interesting to see how the Dolphins finish out the season. If I had to put money on it, I'm picking Dolphins to win the AFC East at this point.
I think that's fair. And like you said, I mean, they face the Titans. They've got the Jets again. Cowboys, Ravens, Bills to finish the season. It's tough. And there's a way where, things break a certain way in that last game against the Bills with the Dolphins may not matter, right? It could also break another way where that ends up being like a flex to Sunday Night Football win and get in type of game. Maybe not win and get in, like maybe. Depends on how the Dolphins if they go on a 5-game losing streak to end the season, that would
I'd love every second of it. I would not let a single Dolphins fan live it down.
Man, I hope they do. I can't really realistically see that happen, though. That would be an epic collapse. My goodness.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill's good for 2 wins by himself. So I can't. Yeah, he's
especially the way that their defense is certainly playing better now. It's not at the level that I think Dolphins fans hoped it would be just coming into the season. But they are definitely playing better now than they were to start the season. That's for sure. If they lose to the freaking Jets, I mean, that's a crime in and of itself at this point.
Jets don't have a quarterback anymore because the one that they want refuses to play for them. So
good for her. Good for Zach Wilson. They're like any other person in any other situation, I would say, you absolute coward. How dare you not compete for your team, even when you're at this position? You're a former second overall pick. You need to prove that you're even worthy of being in the NFL. But you know what, Zach Wilson? This franchise has put you out to dry time and time again, and they're pretending that everything is fine with their quarterback who tore his Achilles a couple of months ago and pretended that he was going to come back if the playoff chances were high.
Yeah.
So you know what? Good for you, Zach Wilson. You tell him, sit out, be done with this team. Go find somewhere else to play.
I know we're bouncing all over the place a little bit, but I have a question for you, or actually a thought that I want to kind of pass by you here.
Sure.
I think that Zach Wilson's value right now is as high as it's been since midway through his rookie season. And now I say this because they benched him saying he's the issue. They scapegoat. He's the problem. He's every issue. Tim Boyle comes in, absolute train wreck, like disaster, which should have been expected. But it kind of proved that Zach Wilson's at least better than Tim Boyle. So now Zach Wilson's sitting there and he's like, what do I have to gain by going back and playing for you guys, a team which I know I'm not a part of in the future? If I go back and play for you guys, essentially, I'm just going to reduce my value because even if I play well, it's not going to increase my value. If I play poorly, it's just going to make me look worse. So you know what? Screw it. I'm done playing for the Jets. I think his value is high. It's still ridiculously low, but it's higher right now than it's been in a couple years.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. At this point, they just, Tim Boyle just can't do anything, and that was obvious in the game time that he played, however brief it was. And Trevor Siemian, honestly, you could probably give me a coin flip between him and Zach Wilson, right? Like, neither of them.
I think Simeon's better. I think Simeon's better.
I think Siemian might be slightly better, and only because I think he could probably run better than Zach Wilson. Maybe. Mm-hmm. Maybe. I don't know. I decided this Jets team, man. And they're just gonna run it back. They're gonna run it back. Nothing's gonna change with that team.
Yeah, I keep tweeting out that somebody has to get fired. It has to be Joe Douglas or Robert Saleh has to get fired, but they're not going to. Like, they're going to bring them both back. And I wonder if Aaron Rodgers is sitting here, with his delusions that he's coming back off this torn ACL or Achilles, knowing he won't. If he's like, I can't play for this team next year. Like, I'm going to die and I'm going to look awful. I wonder if part of him's just like, I'll hang it up now. Screw it.
It would be amazing if that happened. It would be absolutely hilarious. Again, just thinking of the demise of these other teams. But also, like, I don't think that's the case because I think Aaron Rodgers knows how much of this team was built with his influence.
Yes.
And so I think he thinks like, just run it back, man. We got it. We knew we could do it this year. Oh my God. And I'll stay healthy this time. I got all the ayahuasca in the world, man. I can do this. It's like,
They paid Alan Lazard like $14 million a year or something like that. Some ridiculous number.
Paid Alan Lazard a lot of money.
He has 20 catches and now is getting healthy scratched. Like, it's bad for the Jets right now, which I'm fine with. Let it be bad for them. So.
Oh yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with it. Let's see who else is on this list. Broncos, Browns. We kind of talked about the Texans in relation to the Colts. We feel confident in the Texans, relatively speaking. It's possible they make the playoffs. It's possible they don't. It's tough for them right now. Broncos had their winning streak snapped against the Texans in a very dramatic finish. Their next games are against the Chargers in LA, in Detroit against the Lions, at home against the Patriots and the Chargers again, and then at Las Vegas against the Raiders. Based on how they're playing, I mean, what? I see one loss here for them. I don't think they'll dominate the Chargers, and it's certainly possible in a divisional game that, Justin Herbert just has a psycho type of game against them and, lights them up and gives them a devastating loss when they're trying to push for a wild card. It's possible. I don't think it's very likely. Actually, what might be more likely than anything else. Yes, I know. Yes. So you've got the Chargers for their next game. Then the Lions and the Patriots, and then they go against the Chargers again. The odds of Brandon Staley being fired by that point of the season, maybe even the week before that happens, and interim head coach Kellen Moore, interim head coach whoever is there, they get that interim head coach bump and knock you off. That might be the most likely scenario to happen for the Broncos right now.
It's going to have the Chargers. That's going to happen at one point in this season, and it's going to happen one of 2 weeks. It's either going to happen prior to week 16 when the Chargers and Bills play each other, or prior to week 17 when the Chargers and Broncos play each other. When it happens, along with when Justin Herbert has that ridiculous game he's capable of, because there's one left. There's at least one of those left on the schedule for Justin Herbert.
Yes,
that team is going to have some trouble. So does that happen against the Bills or does that happen against the Broncos? As crazy as it sounds, Justin Herbert could ultimately decide which of those two teams gets into the playoffs.
Fascinating. This is the best part about looking at these schedules, is just like imagining these absolutely coked up scenarios. They're just like, it's possible. We've seen this sort of thing before, right? Like anything's possible in the NFL. Also, going back to the Chargers, you talked about the Titans having 2 of their punts blocked in the same game. I know exactly another game where that happened, and it was a Chargers game, 2010 against the Raiders. They had a punt blocked for a touchdown, and then they had a punt blocked for a safety on back-to-back punts.
I mean, that's the most Chargers thing that a Chargers team could do. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
There's a great secret base video, which is an SB Nation YouTube channel about the 2010 Chargers. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Watch that if for anybody that's interested in really random football teams that aren't the Bills. So that's the Broncos. That's their chances. The Browns, who are now turning into the Fighting Joe Fleckos. One of my best friends, Tyler, is a Browns fan, and he texted me in the middle of the game yesterday. It was just about one of the saddest things I've ever read in my entire life. He said, it's only a half, and Flacco is probably washed, but this has been the most competent quarterback play in 2 decades for the Browns. And I was like, well, that's just depressing. I mean, it's just a 39-year-old. He's got to be 39, right? 38, 39, something like that. He was in 2008, 15. Yeah, so about in that range. The fact that he is the best quarterback they've had this season is astounding. Unbelievable. It's just bad. The fact that their playoff hopes kind of hinge on Joe Flacco not being terrible down the stretch is really concerning, but probably as concerning, maybe slightly less, because I feel more confident in their defense, but their defense did not play well yesterday. They gave up 30-something points to the Rams, and the Rams have won 3 straight games. They're also in the playoff hunt in the NFC, but that defense was one of the best defenses in the NFL for a good reason, and they just got absolutely dog-walked by the Rams, and they didn't even get a sack. They gave up a bunch of points. They just, at no point did it feel like the Browns defense came to play against that team. And you look at their remaining schedule against the Jaguars, against the Bears, against the Texans, Jets, and Bengals. The Jaguars and the Texans present a pretty bad matchup if your defense continues to play like this. The Bears, whatever. Who cares about them? The Jets are inept. The Bengals, whatever. But like the Jags and the Texans, if your defense is not playing well against them, you're absolutely done for. And at that point, you're looking at 10-7. And in that division, where you've got the Steelers, who we already talked about them, you've got the Ravens, right? Like 10-7 might not cut it for them.
Yeah. And when it comes to so I'm about set to say the Browns are dead in the water too. So Myles Garrett is nursing some sort of injury. We saw him in that sling last week. And in fact, literally yesterday, he played 89% of the snaps, didn't produce a single box score snap. Or it's no stat at all. And so to me, that kind of implies that Myles Garrett is injured and playing through it. And if that's the case, and he's not Myles Garrett at this point, they're done, because that defense is going to drop off a hill without Myles Garrett. And I don't believe that Joe Flacco can bring them on a run. So the Browns aren't kind of on the radar for me. Obviously, they're still ahead of the Bills. And even if the Bills, let's say, win next week and the Browns lose, the Browns are still ahead of the Bills in the AFC standings.
Yeah, that's going to be all these teams are critical to what the Bills need to do moving forward. But yeah, it's going to be a tough road for the Bills no matter what happens. They are going to need some sort of outside help in order to make the playoffs at this point. And it's tough. This is what happens when you find ways to lose games as opposed to finding ways to win games. This sort of situation you end up in at the beginning of December. All right. Moving on. We're going to talk about the Chiefs. Chiefs played last night against the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau Field. Very, very, I liked that game. I liked about 98% of that game until that final drive where it just all fell apart because NFL refereeing just sucks. And it's funny because for most of that game, I was like, this is, as far as refereeing goes, I was like, this is fine. It didn't feel like they were inserting themselves a whole lot just as a conscientious, objective viewer. I just felt like, oh yeah, this has been a well-called game. In fact, there were a couple of plays where I felt like, that's not a hold, but they're going to call that a hold on one of the offensive linemen. And they never did. I was like, all right.
They let him play, yeah.
They did. And that's fine. That's how that should go. And then on that last drive, it was just like, oh, Patrick Mahomes got hit out of bounds. That's a penalty. It's like, he was not out of bounds. That wasn't it. The guy stepped out of bounds. The clock stops. That's not when you called the whistle at all, actually. Was there pass interference there? No, not at all. No interference. Nobody saw any sort of interference. Okay. It's just a bizarre set of calls and non-calls that happened at the end of the game that kind of leaves a bad taste. But regardless, one of the big takeaways that I got from that game, first of all, Chiefs offense is still a problem where they just cannot, they just can't. They're not the same team. They're just not. No. And Kelsey is trying his best, but when you are getting consistently bracketed on the majority of your plays, that's tough to beat. It doesn't matter who you're playing against. When you have two different people who are bracketing you inside and out, it's tough to beat. It just is. And really, the most consistent part of their offense is Isaiah Pacheco, right? Who's a very tough runner. He runs like he is mad at the ground. It's actually really kind of funny to watch at times, just seeing how he runs. And he is the most consistent part of their offense. I want to say their offensive line is the most consistent part of the offense, but even they're not that consistent. Their interior is great, but their tackles are very messy. Juwan Taylor got paid a lot of money to go to this team. And I don't even think he's that bad of an offensive lineman, but he gets called for so many penalties. And some of it isn't even that whole false start business, right? There's guys that do that, whether it's Juwan Taylor or Lane Johnson is another one of these guys that does that. Like, that got a little over officiated and a little overdrawn out, but like that dude holds. He's got like actual false starts that happen. Like he and this is not an offense anymore that can afford penalties like that to happen to them, because they don't have the juice, they don't have the weapons to just pick up 15 yards, 20 yards at a time anymore. It's just not in their wheelhouse at this point. Yeah. They need to be an offense that stays in rhythm, that stays on schedule. But if they keep getting penalties or they keep getting drops from their receivers, it just can't happen. And then they're stuck scoring like maybe 20 points a game. If they're really putting it together, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, so I had an actually interesting reaction on Twitter today, or interaction on Twitter today with somebody who said the only way the Bills have a shot is if the Chiefs continue or look as bad as they did yesterday, which we can't rely on. And my response was simply, they've looked this way all season. This isn't a new thing. This is a new thing to people that haven't watched the Chiefs yet this season. They just don't look good on offense. Like, legitimately do not look like a good offense. And I know as Bills fans, we've watched the Bills kind of be a little inept at times. The Chiefs are in the same wheelhouse, except worse. And it's wild to look at their skill players, especially like their wide receivers are horrendous. Travis Kelce does look a tad slower. Like, legitimately, you can see a little bit slow. I don't think Travis Kelce's done, but he does look slower. No. Yeah. To your point, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, Isaiah Pacheco's right now the best part of that offense. And I'm saying that with an offense that's led by Patrick Mahomes, he doesn't even look great at times. Some of the interceptions he's thrown this year, it's like, whoa, what the hell was that, Patrick? Like, doesn't look like the same player anymore. And so suddenly you're looking at this offense and you're saying, we got major issues here. And you also brought up the tackles, right? So Juwan Taylor, not a great right tackle. And then their other tackle, Donovan Smith, has some sort of neck injury. We don't know what it is. He had to get taken out of the game yesterday and couldn't go back in. To me, that's more concerning for them than maybe anything else we saw yesterday, because now if you take Donovan Smith off that left tackle spot and you have to go with Wanya Morris, an offense that's already legitimately struggling is going to struggle way more than what we saw yesterday.
Yeah, and I mean, last year I was down with some of the guys at the Senior Bowl, and I got to watch and interview Wanya Morris. And I like Wanya Morris as a prospect, and I like what he could become, but having him be your starting left tackle in the middle of the season, you're not even in the middle of the season, we're near the end of the season. It's December. Yeah. Like, this is not a situation you want to be in if you're the Chiefs. The other thing with injuries on defense, Nick Bolton is still hurt, who I think is, in my opinion, is overrated, but like, they would love to have Nick Bolton right now because Drew Tranquill, who was his replacement and I think is a better player, also got a concussion or is in concussion protocol. And not only that, they made a point last night about talking about their secondary and how healthy they've been and how they've been able to basically have the same starting secondary throughout the whole season. And then Brian Cook gets hurt. Like, this is tough. This is tough. And when you look at their secondary, L'Jarius Sneed is a good player for them and has done a very good job this season. Trent McDuffie has been such a huge chess piece for Steve Spagnuolo, such a Steve Spagnuolo player, just super aggressive, can blitz off the slot, play and run support, cover super well. Just a phenomenal player, and you see exactly why they drafted him where they did. And Justin Reed, even if he's not playing at a overly high level, right? And we've seen Justin Reed play at a high level before. He's still like doing what he needs to do in this defense, and he's playing good enough football for them right now. And it's when you lose Brian Cook, maybe that doesn't matter as much as some of the other players, right? Like a Trent McDuffie, like a L'Jarius Sneed, Justin Reed, those types of guys. But it does matter when you are now having to insert someone new into this lineup because of the way that Spagnuolo runs his defense. Is very complex coverages. It's a lot of rotating pieces on the back end trying to get into these different disguises and stuff. It's very difficult. And if you have somebody who has been there the entire season starting for you, and now he's not there anymore, and you're going against the Bills, who are coming off of their bye week, who now saw another game in which you lost, right? Like, it might get a little dicey for them. And you're going against Josh Allen, you're going against Stephon Diggs, you're going against Gabe Davis. We've talked about this for the Bills all season. If they don't shoot themselves in the foot, they can score 30-plus points every week. Yeah. And you saw that against the Eagles. You see that against the Jets. This is a game that they can win, especially when you're looking at their defense getting really banged up at this point. It's going to be tough for them to contend with this. And the defensive line still has Chris Jones, and you've got George Karlaftis, who has been playing better, but like you can isolate those guys essentially to the point where like Chris Jones, you can reasonably find a way to mitigate his total impact. You're not going to eliminate him because he's an elite level football player, but you can do enough things to scheme around Chris Jones to mitigate his overall impact. Same thing with Karlaftis. Like there's, if all the Bills have to worry about up front, realistically, is those two guys, and not have to worry about like their linebackers really being in a position to make big plays, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough for this Chiefs defense. And it's a shame because they have carried this team throughout this whole season.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually like the more and more, and I haven't really dove super deep into the Chiefs outside of the handful of games I've watched of them, like understanding their depth chart, but going to dive much more in starting to probably tomorrow into them. That being said, though, the Bills match, like, just from a pure matchup standpoint, like looking at the players the Chiefs have, looking at the players the Bills have, I actually love this matchup for the Bills. Like it just fits on both sides of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, like Chris Jones, undoubtedly their best player. That's not taking anything away from a Trent McDuffie or a Justin Reeder or a Jerry Sneed, but Chris Jones is without a doubt their best player. The Bills offensive line might be playing the best in the NFL. Plus the fact that Josh Allen has this insane ability to avoid sacks kind of mitigates my fears up front. And then their injuries at linebacker, it's like, well, Dalton Kincaid can kind of eat there. And do you have anybody that can really handle Stephon Diggs one-on-one? No. And meanwhile, Khalil Shakir's like, there's so many things on the offensive side of the ball I look at and I say, like, the Bills kind of should have their way, especially with what Jordan Love just did. And Jordan Love doesn't lick anything close to what Josh Allen is. So I will ride with the idea that Josh should be able to have a better game. And then on the flip side, you go to what the Chiefs have on offense. And I'm like, the Bills have some issues in their secondary where they're banged up, right? Rasul Douglas is starting to get come into his own in this defense, which is great because Rasul Douglas is a very good player. But Christian Benford is an interesting player that has his ups and downs. No Trey White, there's a little bit of an issue. And then Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer looking like they're slowing down in the same manner that Travis Kelce are. But those things don't really matter against a team that doesn't have any wide receivers. So now you're looking at Terrell Bernard at linebacker, matching him up somehow on a player like Travis Kelce with Jordan Poyer coming down. And then the Bills defensive line, which has been a strength all season for the most part, playing against this offensive line that is banged up on the edge or not good on the edge. And it's like the Bills could actually be legitimately better than the Chiefs on both sides of the football heading into Sunday at 4:30.
I agree with that. And I would also feel right now pretty confident in the Chiefs somehow winning this game.
Yeah.
Because they almost won that game last night when they really didn't have any reason or to be in that game. And the Bills have just found ways to blow games late. So it wouldn't surprise me if this comes down to a final drive with Patrick Mahomes and he breaks our hearts again. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But it's a good matchup for the Bills, like you said. It is a good matchup, and if they can find a way, especially coming out of the bye week, to attack this Chiefs defense, I don't know how confident I would be in the Chiefs coming back from like a 14, 17 point deficit.
Yeah, I mean,
it would be hard.
I can tell, like, let's say I can tell you right now, I can say the Bills put up 28 points. The Bills winning that football game.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless here's the thing, Mahomes, who has not been playing great football this year, he can also just turn it on at any point and have a free. We were just talking about Justin Herbert going off and having a freakish game.
Right.
Mahomes can just become God at any second, and then we're in big trouble. So I think that the Bills on paper are the better team going into this game, which is wild to say because we're 6-6 and they're 8-4. But just the way that if you look at all the things that are sitting in front of it, it's like, yeah, the Bills might be the better football team right now, physically right now.
Yeah, I would agree. RJ says, I could see McDermott losing it and just fighting Andy Reid Greco-Roman style if it was close in the fourth quarter. The amount of money that I would pay to see that happen is both dangerous and irresponsible. And I would totally do it if I thought that would actually happen. Never forget that Sean McDermott was fired by Andy Reid in Philadelphia in 2010 after the 2010 season and replaced by offensive line coach Juan Castillo as the defensive coordinator. Not enough people talk about that, especially when we're talking about like Andy Reid and his coaching legacy, right? And like those last 2 years in Philadelphia got weird. Yeah. They got weird and they got bad. I mean, it was a very, very interesting time in Philadelphia when they ended up just like not having anything to do with winning at that point. They were a bad team. They were tough to watch. I actually very distinctly remember a time, I can't remember if it was in 2011 or in 2012, but it was after a loss. They were kind of reeling, and a Philadelphia sports reporter during the press conference, and Andy Reid is always just very boring during press conferences, very much in the same way that Sean McDermott is. Somebody asked Andy Reid, so do you think there needs to be a different voice, a new voice in that locker room? And Andy Reid just looks at the guy and he said, you want to talk to him?
Oh, geez. I do not remember that.
I don't think anybody else really remembers that either. It kind of got swept under the rug of a lot of other things that were happening with the Eagles at that time. But it was a great moment. Especially for Andy Reid, who just never says anything like that. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens in this game. If Bills win, they get to 7-6. And you would think they would feel pretty confident after that game, winning in Kansas City after a bye week. I would feel pretty confident in that. Dawson Knox on the return sometime soon. Also recently engaged. Good for him. And the Chiefs would be at 8-5 and still would look ahead in their division. I'm not predicting like them to like start falling off and be out of the playoffs or anything like that, but like, they're gonna be tough. They're gonna be very, very tough. Oh, look, somebody does remember. Jordan Poyer's driver. That's my favorite Andy Reid press conference moment ever. There we go. Someone remembers. Pepperidge Farm remembers. Anything else for you about the Chiefs in this game?
I don't really have anything else about this game, but I have one last, because I know we're getting close to the end of the show. I have one last kind of dual question for you, just kind of see where your mind's at. So today, who do you think would win MVP, and who do you think deserves to win MVP?
Man, first of all, MVP discussions are generally abhorrent to me because they lack any semblance of nuance, because it typically goes to the quarterback with the best record, typically. Mm-hmm. Which is a stupid way of doing it, but that's generally how it goes. Who do I think would win? If the Niners keep doing what they're doing, it will probably be either Brock Purdy or Christian McCaffrey. One of those two. Like, if it depends on who really goes on a run, right? Like, if Christian McCaffrey has, 4 or 5 games of, 200-plus scrimmage yards every game to end the season, which seems unlikely given how many weapons there are in San Francisco to be used. Mm-hmm. But if that happens, they would give it to him, something like that. If Brock Purdy continues to play his perfectly fine, reasonable level of football, he will be the MVP. Okay, cool. We're going to completely devalue the most valuable player award. Doesn't make any sense. Who do I think deserves it? Probably Josh Allen.
So I'll just give you my two. Who, if
Go
it
ahead.
ends today, who would win it? I
Mhm.
think Jalen Hurts would win it today because they still have the best record and he still has
Yeah.
these stats. He has the raw stats to go up there. Who deserves it? It's Christian McCaffrey. He is that entire. I know the 49ers have all these weapons. Debo looks great. George Kittle. Brock Purdy's playing good football, but a lot of it's because of the weapons. But it's that entire offense runs through Christian McCaffrey. If he's not there, they're nowhere near as good as they are right now. And this is me saying all of this while knowing Tyreek Hill is going to break the receiving record. I still think Christian McCaffrey is the one person that deserves it. Last thing I'll say on MVP, though. If the Bills go on a 5-game win streak and make the playoffs, and Josh Allen has 50 touchdowns, so he needs 17 in 5 games. If he hits that 50 mark, he wins the MVP. If he doesn't hit, say they go on a 5-game win streak and he only gets to 45, they won't give it to him. I'm telling you, they'll hand it. And wait, how livid I would be if they gave that award to Brock Purdy if Josh can pull that off and the Bills can pull that off. Yeah.
I'm gonna be very clear. Brock Purdy should not be the MVP no matter what happens, unless he goes on an absolute tear. Just what are we doing here? Like, come on.
He should. I wholeheartedly agree. He should not win the MVP. He is in the MVP conversation because his stats, raw stats, just the raw stats, are insane. They make no sense. Yeah. But that's the only reason. Is he the reason for most of those stats? Hell no. Deebo Samuel alone had 3 touchdowns yesterday, just that he created. Yeah. And those get credited to Brock Purdy. So anyway.
Yeah, it's MVP, man. It's wild. I'm sure our guest next week will probably end with a very long-winded discussion of why Dak should be MVP. And if Dak continues his current stretch and the Cowboys win out or whatever, and they end up winning the NFC East, that'll be a very clear swing and probably a well-deserved swing. I wouldn't if that happens, I would not be mad about Dak Prescott getting MVP.
If they win the NFC East, I could see him winning that award, and honestly, deservedly so at that point.
Yeah, at that point, that would be a pretty crazy stretch of football if he's able to do that. I don't have any true or rubbish prepared, unfortunately. You'd think coming out of a bye week that I would have something. Unfortunately, that is not the case right now. I can I don't know if you have something in the holster.
There's a really easy one that we could do true or rubbish on.
Yeah.
We've asked it.
we've asked it many times, and you know what? Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe that's exactly what we need to do. So let's see if
it's true or rubbish.
Let's go. All right. Go ahead. Do we already have an answer? People already know what we're doing.
True or rubbish? The Buffalo Bills make the playoffs.
I'm going to say rubbish. I know you'll say true.
Okay. I will say true because I think they beat the Chiefs. If they lose to the Chiefs, I will say rubbish every single week until the final week of the season.
That is rubbish all after all. It was all rubbish.
It's conflicting choices. It doesn't know where to go at this point. Ralph Wilson Sr. from the grave. Thank you for watching. Rubbish. Steve Noble says true. RJ says rubbish with a sad face. I agree. That is sad. Jordan Poyer's driver again with trubbish, which might be the most accurate description of it here. It's just tough. It's a tough schedule for them. Things got to break their way, and things have not broken their way this season. So it's hard for me to say that's going to happen now. Is it possible? Of course it is, but I don't necessarily see it happening.
Start with one win, and this show will be a lot of fun on Monday.
God, I hope so. Doing this show after losses is not fun. Just in case anyone was wondering at home, doing shows after losses is not a fun thing to do. But we do it anyway because we love every one of you, and we hope that you enjoyed this podcast. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment, share it with your friends, lovers, enemies, and neighbors. We really appreciate all the support that you guys give us. It's really, really meaningful for all of us. We love doing this show, even after a loss. It's tough, but we do love and enjoy doing this. It's a lot of fun, and we get to interact with you guys, which is a lot of fun. If you are someone who is already a OnePass subscriber, thank you all very much for doing so. If you are not, please consider signing up for OnePass for $60 a year. Ignore the little number there. It's actually $60, not $57. But even with a 3 bump increase, it is the best value in terms of your money and getting legit, real football content in return. Because what we put out there is great stuff. You get access to Greg Thompson's salary cap breakdown. You get exclusive articles and player breakdowns. You get access to the Cover One Slack community, which is great, especially on game days when you're sick of Twitter and people like Steven Ruiz popping off on your timeline for no reason at all. It's well worth it. Plus, you get a nice T-shirt and a decal, and who doesn't love a little swag here and there? So consider signing up for OnePass if you are not already a OnePass subscriber. We appreciate each and every one of you. So that's going to be it for us. Uber, where can the people find you?
At UberHansen on Twitter. I'll be dropping rooting interest for this week on Wednesday. Tells you who to root for in every single game and why you should be rooting for that team. And then on Friday will be a matchup preview of Bills Chiefs. I think I kind of gave away my prediction, but let's see what score I come up with on Friday.
There you go. You all can find me at DFAUXY or at DFoxy on Twitter. I will do a recap after next week's Chiefs game. We will see how that all goes. Thank you all for tuning in. Go Bills. Thank you all for coming. I've already said that enough times. All right. Bye-bye.